What's up, friends? Last week's tournament results are in, and I got all the data here for you. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Before we get started, we'll do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps push the video out there for more people to see. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you get all the latest videos, and it really helps support me and support the channel. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. All right, the first thing we're going to take a look at is the player numbers for last week. So last week, it was a fairly busy week. We had just under 900 players, and for the data slate, we're just under 7,200. Games played was just under 4,500, and we're just over 37,400 for the data slate. And the number of tournaments last week was 12, bringing the total for the data slate up to 121. All right, and the first thing we're going to look at is the win percentage by armies for the previous week. So just a reminder, Games Workshop's acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%. So anything that falls in that category will be green. Anything slightly above will be yellow, and anything way above or below will be in red. So at the top there, we have Imperial Agents at 57%. Next is Demons, number 2 at 56%. Then Thousand Sons at 53%. We have Knights, Chaos Knights, and Aeldari at 52%, and Orcs at 51%. And down to bottom, we have Sisters at 28%. I can foresee a frowny face in the comments already. We have Black Templars at 34%. Mechanicus sitting at 40%. Drukhari at 41%. And then we had Gene Stealers rounding out the bottom 5 at 44%. All right, so let's take a look at some of the notables here. Chaos Knights, they've been struggling for a while, but they had a couple good weeks in a row here. So this week was another good week with 52%. Demons had another good week, obviously, at 56%, and Agents had a pretty good week. Now they had a really low representation. We'll get in that in the next slide, but still, 57. It's nice to see. Thousand Sons has a couple bounce-back weeks in a row, so another week doing well with 53%. Down to bottom, Mechanicus win rates dangerously low the last couple weeks. They're kind of creeping down into that Sisters and Black Templar category. Now, this week they actually did Sisters and Black Templar even outdid themselves, and they're way down there. There's a couple armies, including Drukhari, in there that are really struggling. Everyone else is pretty good. You know, Gene Stealers was doing well the last couple weeks, but this week they're down to 44%, so they had a little drop-off this week. Overall, most armies are in that good range. We just have 3 or 4 that are really struggling to maintain a good win rate. And this slide is the army representation. So this is the percentage of players playing each army. So the average representation, if everyone was playing every army equally, we would be about 3.7%. So just keep that in mind. At the top, Aeldari at 8.6%. Space Marines at 8.5 at number 2. Number 3 of Necrons at 6.2, tied with Custodes at 6.2. Then we have Astra Militarum at 5.8 and Tyranids at 5.7. Down to bottom, no surprise, Imperial Agents, 0.4%. Kind of surprising, Thousand Sons, 0.8%. Sisters, not surprising, 1%. Deathwatch, 1.2%. And Votan at 1.3%. All right, so Aeldari Codex remains on top. A lot of players playing the new Codex and really enjoying it, obviously. Space Marines, they had a little bit of a dip. I'll say a dip down to 6%. It's back up to over 8% this week. Necrons and Custodes, popular as ever. Down to bottom, I mentioned Thousand Sons. They did have a very good win percentage, but they had a really low player count this week. They're kind of feeling it as well. I think people are a little disheartened with that army. Sisters, 1%, not surprising based on the results they've been having this entire data slate. I'm surprised anyone's still playing them. Deathwatch at 1.2. They're always going to be down there. Votan is 1.3, is a little lower than it normally is. Templars at 1.5, also not surprising based on their results for this entire data slate. Interesting to note that the top 5 armies, from Aeldari down to Tyranids, they make up about 33% of all players. So, you know, ideally, you would not want 5 armies carrying in 1/3 of all players. So if you go to a tournament, one in every 3 is going to have one of those 5 armies that are mentioned up there. So hopefully, the next data slate can breathe some life into some of the armies that we know when they're doing well, have the player base, like Thousand Sons and Sisters. When they are a competent army with good rules and fun to play, they are up over the average or right around the average. So that's kind of, you know, a lot of those players are probably playing the armies that are up at the top there. Same as Black Templars. They're a little bit higher. They're not usually super high. And Drukhari could be doing a little bit better. They kind of up and down. Mechanicus at 2.1 is surprising to see based on their win percentage. They are a popular army with their player base, I find, same as Gene Stealer cults. Well, they're both technical armies and kind of hard armies to collect due to the high number of models and cost, and their painting can be a little difficult. but the players who play them really like them, so they do maintain a decent representation despite their lack of success. Moving on, we have the chart here that shows the win rates, XOX1, and representation all together. And just a reminder, XOX1 is the percentage of the players for each army that had 0 losses or 1 loss at a tournament. It's a good way to sort of show how the player base is doing. Well, the win percentage will show the average of how people are doing overall. The higher XOX1 you have, the more people you have in a tournament doing really well. So that kind of shows like the power of the army, like the ability to actually like win a lot of games and get to the top tables. So this chart combines all the percentages together, and the farther the bar stretches across, the higher the combined percentages are. So at the top we have Imperial Agents, 0.4%, so they only had a couple players, but those players did really well this week, 57% win rate and a 50% XOX1. They kind of live and die by the amount of players they have. So last week they were down at the bottom just because those players didn't have any success, and this week they did. So it was a good week for them. Aeldari, 52%. Their XOX1 this week was over 25%, and their rep was almost 9. So, over a quarter of every Aeldari player that showed up to a tournament only lost 1 game or didn't lose any games. So, and then you combine that with the 52% win rate. So there's, for every 1 player that went 4-1, there's a player that went 1-4. So I think it's a good indication that while the army is overall balanced, that there is play in there to do really well if you know what you're doing and how to get that out of the army. Okay, then we have Imperial Knights, another army that had pretty high XOX1, 24%. So they had a really good week. And then Demons, Chaos Knights, and Astra Militarum sort of rounding out that top chunk. And then down at the bottom, Sisters at 28% win rate, 0% XOX1. So, they just, not surprising for however many players showed up, they had no success at all. Black Templars, same thing, 34 and then 0. Space Wolves, 45%. So, right at that bottom of the Games Workshop's acceptable win rate, but they only had a 5.3%. So while they were within that acceptable win rate, just barely, they pretty much had no one that had any sustained success through the tournament. So you had a lot of people going 2-3, 3-2, 1-4 kind of thing. And then you look at the next one above, you have like AdMech, 40% win rate, so a lower win percentage by 5%, but their XOX1 is actually double the Space Wolves. So while on average AdMech players are doing worse, the players who know how to play with them and the players who are good with AdMech are actually finding a lot more success than, say, Space Wolves. So you have 10% of all people going 5-0 or 4-1. So based on these numbers, there is more play in AdMech to do well, but there's probably a lot less there to sort of prop up the bottom. This is more of an argument of like an army's floor versus an army's ceiling, where AdMech has a really low floor based on these numbers last week. So there's just, they have potential to do really bad is there, but their ceiling is higher than, say, Space Wolves based on these numbers, where their potential to do good, if you know what you're doing and you play it properly, or you do everything just right, is higher than, or say, Space Wolves, where the units or the data sheets are good enough to sort of muscle you through to a 45%, but they're not good enough to get you into those top tables. And the same goes for the top. You have Aeldari, where they're doing above average win percentage, but not crazy good. But Aeldari have a good floor, and they have a really high ceiling at 26% XOX1. So they have that potential to do really well, and their stuff's good enough that it just keeps them in that like nice, comfortable zone. So even if you're not, say, great with Aeldari, you will be good enough to probably get a couple wins if you know what you're doing. All right, moving on. We have the tournament wins for each army last week. So at the top, Chaos Space Marines picked up 3 more wins. They've been doing really well the last couple weeks. Blood Angels with another 2, and Aeldari with another 2. Chaos Knights did get another win, which is nice to see. And despite all the struggles last week, Space Wolves actually did get another win. And this is tournament wins for each subfaction. So we'll just take a look at how those wins for the armies broke down. Creations of Bile for CSM got 2 wins. And they actually got another one from Fellhammer, which is kind of surprising because they have an extremely low player count for Fellhammer. So I don't know what happened there, but it's nice to see the random detachment that everyone forgot about get a tournament win. And then you have Aeldari's a spread over Warhost and Devoted If You Need. And then you have, of course, Legion of Excess picking one up. All right, and this is the win percentage by armies for the Dataslate. So this is the last 10 weeks. So at the top, we have Deathwatch maintaining their top spot at 51.4. Number 2, Chaos Demons at 53.6. Necrons at number 3 at 51.5. Imperial Knights at 51.2. And Custodes at 50.7. And then down at the bottom, we have Black Templars at 40%. So they are just teetering on that, falling into the 30s, which is really not good. Sisters at 42.9, Admech at 43, and then Knights at 44.9, and World Eaters at 45.7. Thing to note, the top 15 armies are all within 8 percentage points of each other, which is quite good. That's not that big of a range overall. So that's overall the general balance is looking okay. Down at the bottom, you have Admech and Sisters, and Sisters have been doing consistently poor this data slate. They got gutted, and I say this every week. But I feel for you guys. I hope that the bottom armies there, Admech, Sisters, and Templars, all get some love and can help raise that floor up and get them back into a more competitive state. And same as Mechanicus, they've had a couple weeks here and there where they've propped up the win percentage, but for the most part, they've living down at the low 40s, as you can see. And as I mentioned, Templars, they're just on that knife's edge of below 40%, which is you never want to be in the 30s. Even if it's 39.9, that's just it just looks and feels terrible. So hopefully something can be done there. And here's the army representation for the last 10 weeks of the data slate. Again, the average is 3.7. So at number 1, we have Space Marines at 8%, Necrons number 2 at 6.5, Militarum 5.8, Custodes 5.7, and Tyranids at 5.4. And then down at the bottom, you have Agents at 0.3, Deathwatch at 1.4, Sisters 1.4, Templars 1.6, and Drukhari 1.7. So some standouts here, Aeldari, thanks to their success of the new Codex, their numbers are climbing quite steadily. They just jumped over Demons, who have been pretty high up most of the data slate. Admech still has a decent representation, 2.2. It's not great, but it's pretty good, considering they've been struggling for the last 10 weeks, or I mean, they've been struggling for this entire edition, basically. Players who do play Admech like their little robots, and they are sticking with them. And former standouts from earlier in the edition, kind of interesting to see, sitting at the bottom. You have Sisters of Battle, who were at the top for a while. You have Black Templars, who had a good run for a little bit there. Thousand Suns had a really good run, and they're near the bottom of rep. Space Wolves also at the bottom. So these are armies that sort of indicate when they're doing good, they do have the players, because their representations were much higher last data slate. So if they can be fixed, these numbers should be compressed down quite a bit to be a lot more average across the board, which it would be, you're always going to have the ones at the bottom, like Agents and Deathwatch and Drukhari, like they're just always going to be near the bottom. But we know the players for those armies are there, like for Space Wolves and Thousand Suns and Sisters. We know they're there, they're just not playing them because the army's no good, so why would they play them? They're playing something else, probably Space Marines, judging by the numbers. So if we can help them out, we can strip a lot of the top and feed it into the bottom, and we can get a lot better balance for the army representation. All right, and the same chart for the previous week. Now I have it for the entire data slates for 10 weeks. So this includes win rates, XOX1, and army rep. So at the top, Agents, mentioned before, live and die with a lower player count, and they're living by it right now. Then you have Demons, Necrons, Aeldari, and Knights. And at the bottom, you have Templars, Sisters, Admech, World Eaters, and Chaos Knights. So for the most part, everything down to like Space Marines is doing pretty good. Like they're all kind of in that top chunk. And then you have another chunk between Death Guard and Dark Angels. And then you have that chunk down at the bottom. And then you have way at the bottom, Sisters and Black Templars. So you have a few standouts in XOX1. So you have Demons at 19, almost 20%, and Aeldari at 20%. So those are the armies that have probably the highest, I would say the highest ceiling, or close to the highest ceiling based on the numbers. They have the highest chance to do really well, or they have the greatest percentage of players doing really well. So that would indicate that they have a really high ceiling for the army. So a lot of potential to excel. And then you have a couple things like Deathwatch, where their army rep is extremely low, but all their other numbers are really good. So there's a lot of play there for a single detachment army, but they know what they're doing and they're doing really well. And then you take a look at the bottom, you have Sisters, Black Templars, they're under 10% XOX1, and they have really low rep and really low win percentage, so there are armies there that are struggling mightily and need some help across the board. Their army floor is extremely low, and their ceiling is extremely low, so they're just crunched into the bottom there. Then you have someone like Admech, who has a higher rep than them, it's only 2% XOX1 higher, but that makes a big difference. They're in a decent spot from player and XOX1 percentage-wise, and I think a little bit of adjustments to armies like that would put them in a much better spot. All right, so next we're going to look at is army tournament wins week by week. So this shows the total number of tournament wins for each army for the Dataslate and broken down into wins by week. So each color represents a different week. So at the top there, we have Space Marines at 13 and Demons tied Space Marines, who have been leading the whole Dataslate at 13, and Chaos Space Marines coming up pretty close with 12. Aeldari's 9. They've made obviously huge jumps since their Codex released. And not surprising, the 3 armies struggling with the most in win percentage and XOX1 are sitting at the bottom with no wins, which is an indication of, XOX1 and win percentage being low, that there's just not a lot of options there to beat those armies that have those options, like Demons, Space Marines, Chaos Space Marines. They don't really stand a chance against those armies. They might be able to beat up on some of the mid-tier armies, but when it comes to the top tables, there's just the power of those armies are just overwhelming, even if you're a really good player in those armies right now. All right, for the first faction, folks, we're going to look at we're going to take a look at Aeldari again. I know we did them a couple weeks ago, but they've been kind of going all over the place with the new Codex, so I just wanted to take a look again. So their army reps going up and up and up each week, and their win percentage is actually staying around 50%. So that's nice to see that despite the extra players being added, those players are all seeing around the same success. If you look at the Subfaction player count, Aspect Host is leading the pack of the new ones with almost 20%. Battle Host still makes up 50%, but that's all mostly from the index. Next Dataslate, this will be a lot different. And then you have Need and Warhost kind of close behind, and everything else a little bit further behind that. And you look at the win percentage, I just highlighted Seer Council. I think they've had 2 players maybe total, and they have a 78% win rate, so can't really take too much from that, but it's just kind of funny to see. And then you can take a look at everything else is doing what you would expect. Besides Spirit Conclave and Ghost in the Webway, everyone's sitting around high 40s to mid 50s, which is kind of what you want to see. It's nice that the Codex came out and it wasn't busted, but it did give the Aeldari players 3 or 4 detachments that do fairly well, so you have options and choices. There's nothing worse than a Codex coming out and there's only one choice to play, which we'll kind of get into in the next army we look at, Admech. So it's nice to have more options so you can try something different and you don't feel like you're pigeonholed into playing one thing. And if you look at the rankings, they're in the top 10 of pretty much every category except win rate, and I feel like that will eventually happen here in the next couple weeks as the Codex gets some more stats into it. All right, and moving on to that army I mentioned is Admech. Taking a look at the army rep and win percentage for the last couple weeks. A few weeks ago, they had 47%, so nothing great, but better than the average. And then the last couple weeks, they've been struggling, but they've maintained that low 2s to 3% rep, which is nice to see. People aren't abandoning their army. If you look at the Subfaction player count here, you can see Haloscreed has almost 65% of the players. So that is a hugely successful Grotmas detachment. And then you have this Skitarii Hunter down at 27, and everything else is just below 4%. And then looking at the win rates, the Data Conclave has 1 player, but says 60% win rate. I just thought I'd point that out. It's kind of funny that they only managed to get 1 player for that entire subfaction. But if you look at everything else, it's pretty much where you expect it to be based on their army win percentage, right around mid to low 40s. The ranks out of 27, they're in the bottom 7 of everything. Unsurprising. Weirdly enough, their highest numbers are in players and representation. Considering everything else, their XOX1's not terrible, considering their win percentage and everything. They're one of those armies that only really have 1 option, maybe 2 if you do Skitarii Hunter, but there's a Codex that came out with 5 or 6 detachments and then Grotmas, and really only have 1 or 2 options. So that's the opposite of the Aeldari. You don't want to get pigeonholed into 1 or 2 options. You want to be able to stretch your legs and play something different and know that I don't have to play this just to have a chance to win a third of my games. You want those options. You want those attachments like Cohort or Rad Zone. If their win percentage was around 45%, and you could say for a weekend or whatever, I'll try something different. I can go into it knowing I might not win, but I have a competitive chance to do okay. Where the other ones would give you a competitive chance to win, but they don't have that. They just have a couple that give you a competitive chance to do okay, and then everything else is like, why bother? So they're definitely an army that needs some love. Bring the floor up, buff some data sheets, or make some severe changes overall to the army to sort of make them just generally more powerful without adding, necessarily might not have to add in too many new rules, but I'm not sure. The Admech players can touch base on that more, but the potential for the army to do okay is there because you do have people with doing okay with almost 12% XOX1, but just it's so specific. You have to do so many things right to get there that you need some help to make sure you don't need to do everything just perfectly to do well. Overall, AdMech is in a rough spot, but the players keep coming, which is good to see. You don't want to see abandoned armies. All right, and thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you get all the latest videos. And it really helps support me, support the channel. And I'll see you next week when the tournament results are in. Later, guys.